Hello friends, welcome to Into It, the podcast that's curious about consciousness. Today we're going to be talking about phenomena like gut feelings and other physiological indications of presentiment, like premonitions of both pregnancy and death. If you have been affected by difficulties related to pregnancy or death, I would recommend checking out the show notes to make sure this will be a comfortable listening experience for you. So, after 9/11, it was reported that a huge amount of the 9/11 victims had premonitions of their impending deaths. There were also many would-be victims that escaped death by heeding to the internal warnings that they felt, and who fortunately didn't go into work or board a plane that day, although scheduled to. A man called Eamon was killed working in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. His wife Bonnie has since written a book called Messages, Signs, Visits and Premonitions from Loved Ones Lost on 9/11, where she details his premonitions leading up to the attack in 2001 and has further collected the stories from other people close to the event. These personal accounts revealed that these premonitions were super common amongst the victims and their loved ones. Final regards were given without reason, mood changes, spontaneous illness, obsession with their own mortality, dreams of death and fire, discussions around death and dying and what they want to have happen when they do. Unfounded self-predictions of a short life expectancy mentioned regularly. Loads of victims literally saying they have a feeling they're going to die soon. There are loads of clear ways that victims showed signs that they knew their death was near. Eamon even spent hours during his family Christmas dinner just 9 months earlier speaking at length with his brother about potential attacks on the World Trade Center and what to do in the event of something similar to the earlier attacks in 93, during which he, Eamon, had personally saved the lives of 63 people. He got a bout of vertigo for the first time in over a year on the morning of 9/11, and Bonnie, his wife, had asked him to stay home. But he dutifully pushed through in spite of his bad feeling and went to work that day, for the very last time. I find that death is a powerful pointer to consciousness and in understanding more about it. But while premonitions can be a foreboding warning, the good news is, according to the most sort of well-renowned psychics that are relied upon for scientific experiment by government officials, meanings behind premonitions of death may not always be death-related, but like the symbolic death card of the tarot, which is more literally related to change or the death of an era, like graduating or getting married, moving or changing a way of life, like the changing of a season. So it can be symbolic, or it can really just be a warning that you have the chance to act on. What I want to know is, where does anxiety fit into this? Like, I worry a lot. A lot that someone I love has been in a car accident or has died, like especially if they've arrived late, pretty much all the time. It's horrible. I guess it could be argued that it's not difficult to differentiate, the same as we discussed previously about intuition being more of a calm knowing and anxieties being more of an embodied experience of stress. But in experiences where it acts as a warning, the premonition, like thought or feeling, may not manifest initially as fear, but if you believe it, surely your reaction is naturally of fear. So if you're afraid to die, which I think would make it hard to separate, although interesting, a lot of the accounts and reports from or about those who have passed over mention that the person themselves was actually quite calm and accepting about their upcoming death, like saying things about it lacking emotion or fearful urgency as if it's just been accepted by them. Although that's often different than when, for example, parents who have premonitions about the death of their child or spouses, then they may have a more fearful response immediately because it isn't them. Or maybe the physical pull to do something manifests as a faster heartbeat and more of an adrenaline survival response when something could be done. Like when it's a warning, but it's more of like a relaxed and accepting physical response when you can't change things. Yes, this does open up the question of how much power do we really have over our supposed fates, which I'm not really sure of really, personally. But it also begs that either way, we consider strong, sudden feelings as some kind of sign. And also that we not be afraid to ask others to take a leap of faith on our feelings. Let me know what you guys think, and if you're bold enough to follow your feelings without reason when it comes to the potential deaths and lives of you and those you love. In our house, Dan and I have learned to trust each other's guts quite well as our own, which by all accounts has helped us navigate some pretty big life choices like living abroad. If he doesn't have a good feeling about a house or a person, a place, a thing, an event, an idea, we stay away and vice versa. I'd love to know if we're just weird or if you guys do that as well. Let me know on my Insta at Jasmine Dine or the podcast Insta, which is quite new still, which is at IntuitPod.
Please leave your message after the tone.
Another question that comes to mind, I guess, balances last episode's question of beliefs with this episode's question of presentiment. The thought is regarding the prediction machine, which is talked about in David Robeson's book, The Expectation Effect. Death by fearful expectation in health-related deaths. So not like 9/11. If you have a premonition and then you die, did you will it to be so? For example, in this world-famous study in Framingham, Massachusetts, doctors have tracked thousands of female participants since 1948, so about 10 to 15 years later in the mid-60s, where all participants were in good health and with no signs of illness. But they were asked whether they thought, based on feeling alone, that they were more or less likely, just in general, to develop heart disease compared with other people their age. The weird thing is that they realized that women who answered more likely were 3.7 times more likely to experience fatal cardiac arrest over a 20-year period than those who had said otherwise in the study. So did they know? Did they have presentiment or a premonition that they were going to have heart problems? Or did their body react to the belief like a command? Either way, something is happening here. In a lot of the nocebo cases documented by doctors, which are fairly rare but quite dramatic, people are having reactions to drugs or lack thereof based on belief, which is quite different to premonitions, but I think it helps the case that what you think can really impact what comes true. Or what comes true has a few impact on how you're thinking now, which both ways seem pretty impressive to me and something that we should definitely be relying on more. So anyway, there's this guy called Mr. A, let's call him that for privacy. I mean, that's what he's called in the case, but yeah. There's this guy called Mr. A, and he's referenced in a case report in 2007 by Minnesota doctors. He was heartbroken after a bad breakup and ended up signing up for a clinical trial of this new antidepressant to help with his moods. He had felt a lot of hopelessness, and upon starting the trial, he found that for a short time, the pills helped. But in the second month of the trial, he found himself at the end of his tether with life and decided to take all of the month's 29 remaining antidepressants at once, trying to end it. He quickly started to regret it and called his neighbour to take him to the emergency room where he collapsed, and then during the examination was pale, drowsy, shaking, and had frighteningly low blood pressure. So he was then attached to a drip, but his condition didn't improve even 4 hours later. The medical team couldn't find any toxins within his system, which was weird. So they got in touch with one of the doctors from the clinical trial who told them that Mr. A was actually on a placebo and had never taken the active drug, but his physiological signs were showing is that he'd basically overdosed. He didn't know it was a placebo, so his body reacted as if it was deadly. That is actually fucking mad to me. He made a full recovery, obviously on learning the news, but seriously, like, how mad is that? His body made him unwell as if he'd taken loads of drugs because he thought he had taken loads of drugs, even though he hadn't actually taken loads of drugs, he had taken sugar pills. To focus, I guess, more on the premonition side of things, I'll introduce you to Kirsten. Kirsten Erlanderson is a leading voice in midwifery education who has been involved with the publication of around 88 studies on the subjects related to midwifery. She and 3 other Swedish researchers worked on a particular analysis that looked at mothers of stillborn babies who had had a premonition that their unborn child might not be well. In the sample of this analysis, there were 614 women who, in the results section of the paper, which I'll obviously link in the show notes, 392 of the 614 women, so 64% of the women, had had a premonition that their unborn baby might not be well. That's 64% of the participants who had had a premonition while pregnant that something was wrong with their baby. 274 of them contacted their clinic and were invited to come in for a checkup, but by then it was too late because the baby was already dead. A further 88 of them, so 22% of them, decided to wait until their next routine checkup, convincing themselves that everything was okay despite feeling otherwise. And 30 women, 8%, contacted their clinic but were sadly told that everything appeared normal without an examination of the baby. Now that last bit actually gets to me and speaks to how perhaps we and medical staff should be giving more weight to premonitions or feelings. Just because we don't know how doesn't mean we don't know at all. We do know it exists, and just because we haven't figured out how it works doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and use it. Like if you moved into a house with a new kind of washing machine and no instructions, you wouldn't just not wash your clothes. You would figure it out. I don't know about you, but I use loads of things that I don't know how they work. Couldn't tell you how a plane works, but I still use them when I go on a holiday. Don't you?
That's true.
Your gut knows, just like your mind knows. The mind-gut connection. You've heard of it. Most of us are familiar with the body's central nervous system. The brain and the spine hold the network of nerves, neurons, and signal-passing chemicals called neurotransmitters, which basically connects the brain to the major organs. The lesser-known part of the nervous system is in the gut. The enteric nervous system, with all of its nerves, neurons, and neurotransmitters, extends from the esophagus through the stomach and intestines and down to your bum. Because it's the same type of neurons, etc., some medical experts call it the second brain, the brain of our gut. In communication and in forces with our head brain, it similarly plays a role in a variety of physical diseases. But importantly, your gut brain is key in overall mental health too. According to an article on gut-brain connection from Cleveland Clinic, this crosstalk in communication between the brain and digestive system is opening up new ways to think about diseases. Not only do the gut and brain communicate through the nervous system, but also through hormones and the immune system. Microorganisms in the gut help regulate the body's immune response. Medical researchers who are studying depressive symptoms, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, autism, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, multiple sclerosis, pain, anxiety, and other neuro conditions are beginning to look at what's going on in a person's guts. Researchers who are investigating ulcers, constipation, and other GI conditions now have also reasons to focus on aspects of brain functioning. That's interesting because it goes both ways. There are several familiar examples. When a person feels danger, the fight or flight response of the central nervous system is triggered. At the same time, the enteric nervous system's response is to slow down or stop digestion. This is done so that more of the body's energy can be diverted into the situation causing the threat. The fear of public speaking also causes the digestive system to either slow down or speed up depending on the GI disorder, and can cause abdominal pain, diarrhea, and other symptoms. Emotions, feelings of excitement or nervousness can cause the familiar churning in the stomach, the so-called butterflies in your stomach feeling. And we know, don't we, hear it into it, that the gut signals the brain when we get a gut feeling about something or a premonition about something or someone. Now, gut feelings might be pretty regular when you're pregnant, since your womb is in that area too. Not only do millions of women claim that whilst pregnant they've had a lot of psychic experiences and premonitions, but we all know people that just knew they were pregnant before they had done a test or had any physical or significant hormonal changes to suggest that they were. There are also loads of people that just knew a friend or loved one was pregnant just by themselves before they did. There are also loads of people that just knew a friend or loved one was pregnant before they themselves did, just by a feeling. Some people intuitively know they're pregnant or that someone else is. Melissa Spilstead is a childbirth educator and the director of Hypnobirthing Australia. She says in a 2015 article, which I'll link in the show notes, that over her long career, she's met with countless mothers that knew they were pregnant from the moment they conceived, even mothers who spent years trying and had no reason to believe that their recent sexual experience would result differently, but they just felt it. Whilst many put this down to coincidence, Spilstead does not. She says in this quote from the article, "There are many mysteries surrounding pregnancy and childbirth, and this is just one of them. But I do believe that the power of the mind is immense, and every thought we have creates a physiological or chemical change in our body. Our intuition is often quoted as being our sixth sense. It's a sense that we don't completely understand and cannot necessarily explain, but that doesn't mean it's not there. And it's the same when it comes to birth. Intuition can definitely come into play during birth if a woman is feeling that something isn't quite right. It could be her intuition telling her that her baby isn't in the right position or could be in trouble, despite others in the room stating otherwise. Or it could be a feeling that interventions are being unnecessarily imposed or suggested. It's surprising just how often mothers discuss these situations with me, and how often they are right." So it seems premonition, as it comes from intuition, is an incredible tool in both life, bringing a child into the world, and in death. And latching onto that, there are the millions of pregnant mothers who had the premonition, or if that's only for bad things, then the gut feeling or even dreams that they were having twins, with no reason to suspect to. I found hundreds of people discussing this phenomena online, and there are millions of accounts of twins who have premonitions about one another. There's this book called Twin Connections by Debbie LaCoucha, or maybe it's LaChusa, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, in which she's collected accounts from loads of twins about their experiences of psychic connections between them and extrasensory perception amongst one another. If one of them is sick or is hurt or has died or is going to be, they can feel it before or during from thousands of miles away. Why? The entanglement of us all is what Einstein referred to as spooky action at a distance. We are all connected, somehow, some way. We are entangled in the lives of one another in more ways than we currently have the capacity to fully understand. But it's interesting, and for me at least, it spikes a lot of excitement. Presumably, the closer you are to someone, the easier it is to feel connection, in the same way as sound works. Presumably, the closer you are to someone, the easier it is to feel the connection, in the same way as sound works. If a tree falls in the wood and nobody hears it, did it make a sound? Yeah. And in the same way, just because you didn't feel the knock at the door doesn't mean it didn't come. There are obviously something that happen in your guts that are just bodily functions for eating, digesting, existing, reactions to hormonal imbalances or stress. Probably most of them are. But I think we can tell the difference when we tune into it too. When I have a gut feeling, it's kind of hard to explain, but you know the kind of same feeling you get of expansiveness in open water? Not in your body, but like, I don't know, I don't want to say that in your soul, but let's just go with that. It's kind of like that, but as if it's like a kind of like womp womp pulsing inside of your stomach, which I know also sounds a bit, anyway, whatever. But the matter is, it's not all burritos and tikka masala in there, is it? At least half of people in an American study from 2017 said that they regularly rely on their gut instincts, and according to a report by Elation, 2/3 of CEOs across 300 studied use gut feelings above data in making important decisions and making them successfully. Richard Branson, who I'm sure you've all heard of, the founder of Virgin, literally said, "I rely far more on gut instinct than researching huge amounts of statistics." I personally believe that the two belong together. Informed decision making using both intuition and data. There's a great article by a neuroscientist called Valerie Van Mulukom on the World Economic Forum where she says, "Relying on your intuition generally has a bad reputation, especially in the Western part of the world where analytic thinking has been steadily promoted over the decades. Gradually, many have come to think that humans have progressed from relying on primitive, magical, and religious thinking to analytic and scientific thinking. As a result, they view emotions and intuition as fallible, even whimsical tools." However, this attitude is based on a myth of cognitive progress. Emotions are actually not dumb responses that always need to be ignored or even corrected by rational faculties. They are appraisals of what you've just experienced or have thought of. In this sense, they are also a form of information processing. Intuition or gut feelings are also the result of a lot of processing that happens in the brain. Research suggests that the brain is a large predictive machine, constantly comparing incoming sensory information and current experiences against stored knowledge and memories of previous experiences, and predicting what will come next. This is described in what scientists call the predictive processing framework. So we predict. Like any skill, some people are better at it than others, but I also think it can be improved and relied upon in a much more significant way by most of us than it currently is. If we return to the concept of the expectation effect and the power of our subconscious minds, we saw proof in the last episode that our beliefs about our abilities directly impact our abilities. So if we believe that our ability to correctly predict the future is non-existent, perhaps it will basically be non-existent for us. You'll never learn to sing beautifully if you don't open your mouth. It's important to say, though, in continuing with the same article by neuroscientist Valerie, it's time to stop the witch hunt on intuition and see it for what it is, a processing style that can provide us with very useful information that deliberate analysing can't. We need to accept that intuitive and analytic thinking should occur together and be weighed up against each other in difficult decision-making situations. End quote again. Like, it's just funny though, isn't it? I wonder if intuition should be separated into decision-making type of intuition and non-decision decision-making. Obviously, decisions come into play in everything, but I mean, if you call on your intuition to make a decision, like a business decision, for example, then maybe you have to be prepared for bias and weigh it up with analysis too. But if your intuition pulls to you out of nowhere, in my opinion, I think that's one to listen to, because it seems to be like more about safety. Do you know what I mean?
I can't figure her out. She's a real puzzle, mystery, riddle.
Now, there are other kinds of presentiment than gut feelings. In a multitude of studies surrounding the subject of unconscious psi, skin reactivity has been measured in the 10 seconds running up to a participant receiving either positive, neutral, or stressful stimuli, and it's proven repeatedly that we feel something bad coming before it does, even when we have no reason to rationally. They proved your skin perceives future emotional images, either erotic or violent or scenes of accidents, without any way of consciously knowing it's coming, with combined odds against chance of 125,000 to 1 in favour of a genuine presentiment effect. Absolutely mad, that. Now, our body reacts physiologically to stressful stimuli that hasn't yet occurred in time. But how? Experiments in presentiment clearly have statistically significant results. There are many studies into anticipatory physiological responses in the skin, in audio processing, in heart rate, in the brain, and in the gut. There's so many that I'm actually just not going to be able to mention them all. But I want to tell you about a few. So, in 1996, a psychologist at the University of Amsterdam called Dick Bierman, which does sound like a joke name, bless him, but anyway, he replicated the original skin conductivity test done by Radin, like many others had successfully, but Bierman was specifically studying the areas of the brain which are used in the presentiment effect. He used the same system with the emotional, like the erotic/violent ones, and using fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging, to measure the amount of oxygen in the blood to highlight where in the brain the presentiment effect appears. Areas of the brain which are more active have higher levels of oxygenated blood as compared to less active portions of the brain. The interesting thing about it for us, though, is the specificity. It turns out that on average, women have a significant presentiment effect for erotic images with odds against chance to 25 to 1, and for violent images with odds against chance to 50 to 1. But for males, there was no difference in violent images, but for erotic images, a presentiment effect with odds against chance of 50 to 1. So if you're wondering, the objective of their study to locate the presentiment effect found that the location of presentiment was actually just widely distributed across the brain. So that bit was just not that useful. But it's interesting, isn't it? So men on average were less intuitive about the upcoming violent images, but more intuitive about the erotic ones, which I guess makes sense. Many researchers have made the case that emotional reactivity found in the presentiment effect is proportional to how the emotional that future event will be to you. Extremely emotional future events will produce larger responses before the picture appears than mildly emotional future events, which also makes sense, doesn't it? You're more likely to have a strong intuitive or instinctual pull in a situation that requires danger, or, your more animalistic side. In 2004, psychophysiologist Roland McCarthy and his colleagues reported a study using skin conductance, heart rate, and EEG measures. The study basically had two conditions, one that was pre-meditation and one after it. Basically used a kind of breathing and visualization method to do the meditation. In short, he found that the heart rate significantly slowed down before future emotional pictures as compared to future calm pictures with odds against chance of 1,000 to 1. He summarized his findings as follows. Of great significance here is our major finding, namely evidence that the heart is directly involved in the processing of information about a future emotional stimulus seconds before the body actually experiences the stimulus. What is truly surprising about this result is the fact that the heart appears to play a direct role in the perception of future events. At the very least, it implies that the brain does not act alone in this regard. Okay, so we know your skin reacts prior to future events, and we know your heart reacts too. Just, by the way, if you'd like me to talk more about the specifics of exactly how the experiments were done, let me know, because I'd like to discuss it all, but I'm afraid of boring you by going on about the same bit for too long, and I will do it for some of them so you kind of get an idea, but not for all of them, because I feel like, that's probably a bit boring. But I am going to also link the resources so you can check it out for yourself, and if you do want me to talk about it more, let me know and I'd love to. So anyway, these studies suggest that when the average person is about to see an emotional picture, they will respond before the actual picture appears under double-blind conditions. These experiments were demonstrated to and on Nobel laureate Kary Mullis, who revolutionized the study of genetics and won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for inventing the PCR test in the 90s, which you may recognize as it's used for COVID testing now. He appeared on the Science Friday radio program in 1999 and said how he had for sure seen the presentiment effect demonstrated, and is quoted to say, "I could see about 3 seconds into the future. It's spooky. You sit there and watch this little trace, and about 3 seconds on average before the picture comes on, you'll have a little response in your skin conductivity, which is the same direction that a large response occurs after you see the picture. Some pictures make you have a rise in conductivity, some make you have a fall. He's done that over and over again with people. That with me is on the edge of physics itself, with time. There's something funny about time that we don't understand, because you shouldn't be able to do that." He's right. Time is something we simply just don't understand right now. Space and time have been baffling our greatest minds for years. How can we think that we know everything and be so closed off to the possibilities when such a fundamental part of being human on Earth is such a mystery right now? I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like the most important thing is to look at the facts and to keep the pursuit of further understanding without allowing our negativity bias for disbelief in the face of the facts to stunt our growth.
Yeah.
In Entangled Minds, Dean Radin said something interesting here. When you step back from the details of these studies, what you find is a spectacular body of converging evidence indicating that our understanding of time is seriously incomplete. These studies mean that some aspect of our minds can perceive the future, not infer the future, or anticipate the future, or figure out the future, but actually perceive it.
Yeah, Mr. White. Yes, science, bitch.
We can perceive the future. Now, this might make me sound a bit crazy, but after all this evidence, maybe it just won't. I've said to my boyfriend for ages that I feel like I'm like annoyingly psychic in a way by like just a few seconds. Like I'll just like hear in my head then quickly say what's about to be done, which people have noticed me do. It's not like this only happens when I'm alone or anything like that. It's like, you know, it's talked about. And basically, I'll quickly say what's going to be done, and then, you know, like the door going or a timer going off or something's going to be said by someone on a TV show just before they say it. And then, you know, it's often predictable, obviously, on TV, but not always, especially on, like, you know, a reality TV program. Or, you know, an answer to a question on the chase that pops into my head just before somebody says their answer, which is either right and I don't know how it's right, or it's wrong and it's like the exact same as what the person answered, but it's like a completely random thing to say. So it's like I've like known what they were going to say. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's weird. And it's like, you know, okay, it's spooky in the moment. And I genuinely think people think I'm smarter than I am because of it, because I swear the answer just pops into mind for me sometimes. Do you guys have that? And do you agree? What is really the use of a 3-second presentiment effect? Is it enough? How much can we get that up? We've proven it exists, so let's get into it. Remember, those studies were all done on the average person, and they weren't informed about what they were being specifically tested for most of the time. And they hadn't been practicing or anything like that for sure. Because how do you practice being able to perceive the future if you don't know that that's a real thing? Well, now we know. Let's try practicing or noticing what our skin or our heart are doing and listening. If you have ideas for how to experiment with this at home, please holler, because I really want ideas for myself and for y'all too. I'm excited about this stuff, and I feel like if you know, you know. So come through, listeners who have experienced this kind of weird shit and just know that it's legit and now have the evidence to prove it so. I want to hear it from you. And on that note,
Talk to me.
you've pulled. This is our segment on your gut feelings, your stories. I want your voice notes, I want your DMs, I want your experiences of following or not following your intuition. Or to hear about your precognitive dreams or whatever you feel is relevant, really. If you're a twin or anything, if you've had premonitions about things, I want to hear about them. This week, my story is actually not from a listener, but I think it really highlights the benefits of heeding to your intuition and brings us full circle, because it's also about 9/11, like what we started with. Now, I'm going to read a quote from an article about premonitions on the History Collection website about a man called Barrett Naylor, who avoided both strikes at the World Trade Center by listening to his intuition, the one in 1993 and again 9/11 in 2001. So here's the quote. It's pretty spooky when a premonition comes true. When it happens twice in the same place 8 years apart, it's almost terrifying. This is what happened to Barrett Naylor in 1993 and again in 2001. On the morning of February 26, 1993, Naylor, a Wall Street executive, was on his way to work at the World Trade Center. It was a regular morning, but when he reached Grand Central Station, he had a sudden and unmistakable feeling of foreboding that he couldn't describe. Something he couldn't explain told him to turn around and go back home. Naylor did just that, and his U-turn probably saved his life because at 12:17 p.m. that day, a bomb exploded in the center, killing 6 people and injured over 1,000. The terrorists had intended to bring down the Tower 1 and force it to crash into Tower 2. Had they succeeded, the death toll would have been in the thousands. Then, on 9/11, Naylor was once again getting ready for work in the World Trade Center when he got the same feeling as he did in 1993. Naylor went home just like he did once before, and he was stunned to discover what happened next. To this day, he's grateful that he'd received the premonitions, but also feels guilty that he was unable to help others. It says in the quote still. To be fair, had he told people about his premonition, would they have believed him enough to go home? Now, end quote. I think this is why learning to trust or practice or develop our intuition more culturally is so important, because really, who would believe him? I reckon I would if he'd been there, right the first time. But I mean, that's me, and I mean, would you? Now, what I'm into right now, this is the other segment. So, I'm going to talk about 2 things. One's a book and one's a product. The book, I think it's good. It's actually just such a beautiful book. We obviously talked a lot about death today, so I want to recommend an interesting book by the established medium that I mentioned last episode called Laura Lynn Jackson. It's called Signs, and it's a really powerful book about the signs and uncanny personal synchronicities that we receive from those we love who have passed over. I found it so engaging, really useful, and beautifully written to connect with readers, and found ways through it to connect with people I know who have passed on. Like my childhood friend Ellie, shout out to Ellie, who was so special to me, who died during the pandemic. And it's so interesting reading these kinds of things and realizing that we all, or most people, share this same feeling of a world we haven't quite figured out yet. She explains through her book that although her abilities are exceptional, they aren't unique, and explains how, in her words, the secret language of the universe is available to us all. I'd recommend this book to everyone, but especially if you've lost someone you love. Give it a try. Try and stay open. Now, on the product side of things, there's this app, right? Maybe you've heard of it. It's called the Lucid app. And it's like Instagram, but instead of random content, it's explanatory visuals for the breakdown of nonfiction books with the most key statements and points alongside it to explain clearly and briefly. It's cool for everyone because if you read a lot, you can see if you want to read the whole book based on what you took in. But a lot of books, it's like, yeah, there's no real need to read the book to take it in if you aren't a big fan of books because the points are made shorter, like it's just there. The App Store description says, Lucid is your visual guide to the world's most important knowledge. Master essential topics in psychology, philosophy, history, finance, leadership, business, health, science, technology, and more. Understand complex concepts quickly with elegant visuals that clarify key ideas and help you stay focused. I don't know what it costs, but it's free to use for a bit, and it's less than 10 quid a month. Which probably isn't that helpful to know, but I don't think it's very much. It's like 4 quid or something like that. There's a free version and there's a paid version. And I think if you do the paid version, you obviously get more things, which makes sense. But it's not too much a month. I don't actually know the exact figures, but it's reasonable. And I think it's okay. And honestly, if you're interested in reading a lot of key books on these topics, or like there's also like self-help things on there, loads of stuff on there that, you know, if you're interested in nonfiction books, but you like to read a lot of them, or you like to claim that you've read a lot of them, you can claim you've read them if you go on there, because you do get a full lowdown of what's going on in the books. You know, if you don't have time to read a 350-page book, 100% use Lucid. Not sponsored, I just really like the app.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby, because this one's a screamer!
So, to finish off, presentiment, it's a thing. Gut feelings aren't always just that fajita you ate earlier, and interestingly, our gut feelings may be transferable. I'd like to read a short quote from Entangled Minds by Dean Radin. I'm sorry that I always reference this book, but it's just so good. Intuitive hunches and psi experiences all involve the act of knowing without knowing how you know, and gut feelings in particular imply a form of intuition based on visceral sensations in the belly. From a conventional point of view, intuitive hunches and gut feelings are due to factors such as forgotten expertise, subliminal cues, and unconscious inferences. The gut is a particularly interesting portion of the nervous system to study because of its close relationship with emotions. Phrases like butterflies in the stomach, a gut-wrenching experience, and a sinking feeling in the stomach attest to this familiar correspondence, which has been studied for nearly 2 centuries. We wondered if gut feelings might be especially sensitive at detecting emotions at a distance. So, in an experiment by Radin's team around gut sensations and presentiment, there were 26 participants, which was 13 pairs. The individuals in each pair have different roles, so let's call them Jack and Jill. Jill basically gets hooked up to an EGG, not to be confused with an EEG, which measures stuff in your brain. An EGG, like an egg, lol, measures stuff in your gut. So yeah, Jill is attached to the gut machine, which measures the electrophysiology of the gut. In the study, Jack, who is the sender, sat with 2 videos in front of him on screens with headphones. At random intervals for 2 minutes per time, one monitor had a live video of Jill, who was far away, and the other monitor had a sequence of either emotional or neutral pictures alongside emotionally appropriate music for the mood. For example, to engage positive emotions, there would be smiling babies and kittens, while upbeat songs like Twist and Shout by the Beatles played. Angry or sad was separate, so just as an indication, angry was like an atomic bomb explosion and Rammstein, and sad was like Adagio for strings, which is totally sad by Samuel Barber. A calm condition used black and white plain pictures like soup in a bowl accompanied by the song May It Be by Enya, which is in Lord of the Rings if you recognize it. And then the emotionally neutral condition was like grey rectangles with slightly different hues accompanied by pink noise. Now, Jack then essentially was instructed to periodically gaze at the video of Jill and then try to mentally send the emotions evoked by the slideshow and tunes. Between the sending periods, he would withdraw the attention from Jill's live video and just chill. But now, obviously, they were testing to see if gut feelings were a type of psi perception by seeing if Jill's gut was more active during the emotional conditions, like her stomach getting tied up in knots, in comparison to neutral conditions. Obviously, just as a reminder, Jill can't see anything. Jill is just sat in a room, hooked up to an EGG, right? So Jack can see Jill, and Jack can see the emotional stuff. They're testing to see if Jill reacts to what Jack sees in her stomach, like without in the future, if you know what I mean. Well, actually, in the past, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the pairs in the experiments, the Jacks and the Jills, all knew each other, so that, you know, well, the other person in their pair, not the rest of each other. So they'd be like husband and wife or brother and sister or whatever, and it was them who mutually decided who would play Jack or Jill. Now, the results showed that Jill's EGG responses were significantly larger when Jack was experiencing positive and sad emotions than when he experienced neutral emotions, with odds against chance of 167 to 1 and 1,100 to 1, respectively. Most of the churning in Jill's gut came within 20 seconds of the beginning of an emotional period for Jack. This experiment suggests that sometimes gut feelings respond to the emotional states of distant people. Of course, a lot of gut feelings are just visceral twitches, but it seems that the belly brain's intuition is more connected with the rest of the world and with other people than previously expected.
Wow, cool, man!
Now, I think that's a good place to stop before my brain explodes all over the microphone. If you liked this episode, tell all your friends, shout it from the rooftops, link it in a message in a bottle, listen to it on repeat, and basically help me out by leaving a review so we can open up the conversations we need to be having to our community of people who want to connect about the subject of our interconnectedness. Love you. Thanks for listening. It means so much. Hope you have a great week, and bye.